right here.
Yeah.
And John, you're saying this is the first presentation you've done since college?
Yep.
Nope.
About 9 years ago.
But no pressure. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. Right. No pressure at all. Yeah.
And I started recording.
All right.
Is that okay, John?
Yeah. Yeah, that's fine. All right. Just for warning, I'm on an iPad, so I'm not sure how well this is gonna work. But I'm gonna share my screen from my iPad. We'll see how well that works.
Pushing the boundaries of technology. I love it.
I know, right? All right. Everything is seeing. Yep. Okay. So I'm going to flip to my. Can people see my slides or?
Yeah.
Okay.
They're vertical.
All right.
Yeah, I don't know. Horizontal?
Oh yeah. Hold
You're
on.
right now.
Yeah, I'm in portrait mode. Hold on.
Ah, way better.
There we go. Yeah, is that better?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So yeah, I'm John Best. As Dan was saying, we met through Twitter. And he mentioned that he was looking for people to speak. I thought that was a really cool idea. And I had just gotten off a gig at a local startup here in San Francisco, where I was a DevOps engineer doing a ton of stuff with Chef and Ruby and infrastructure as code. And when Dan reached out to me, I thought, hey, I could give a talk about that. So a lot of my talk is going to be about what is Chef and why is it useful, and why do people who know Ruby enjoy it, and what are some best practices, what are some pitfalls based on my admittedly somewhat limited experience, but still. So a little bit of overview of his best practices, a little bit of everything, as much as I can fit into a half hour, I suppose. So, but yeah, yeah. So who am I? I'm a DevOps engineer. Right now, I'm a consultant with Deloitte, working for a client of theirs. Been a lot of fun. Done several years of DevOps consulting. Worked for several different clients. Been a DevOps engineer for a number of large and small companies. So run the gamut. Originally started in .NET and C++ when I was a teenager. Um, Kind of evolved. Worked as a .NET software engineer for a few years. Um, Learned Python and Go over the last few years. So doing more and more with that. But I like to keep I like to keep my toes. Like to keep my toes in several ponds. And like I was saying, I did a stint working with Ruby and Chef and encountered a lot of pain from old software and poor best practices that uh, I realized, wasn't such a good thing, because if you don't upgrade stuff for a while, stuff starts to break. Yeah. So, like I say, I joined a startup here in San Francisco. They said they were doing using Ruby and Chef to do infrastructure as code, and I realized that there were many best practices that existed, and I immediately realized that we were doing none of them. So one of my first tasks was to kind of uh, rally the troops, as it were, and you know uh, put in actual best practices and actual good things we should do, and that was pretty successful. But eventually I moved on for other reasons, but I was pretty successful in, kind of bringing order to chaos, and that's kind of what I wanted to talk about. So Chef, the way Chef is configured, a lot of its configuration is based off of a singular file called client.rb, which is basically a massive Ruby file that basically lists everything that Chef needs to know about a client in order to interface with a client. And I should say instead of configuration parameters, I probably should have said something like it uses, it pulls startup variables from different places, because cookbooks are something else. But Chef has a lot of food metaphors, obviously, so it likes to use as many of those puns as it can. So collections of configuration, collections of individual items are called cookbooks, and those individual actions, whether it's provisioning a server, installing software, those are called recipes. So many recipes make up a cookbook. So Chef does things a little bit differently from something like Terraform. Terraform has many ways that it can manage state. But in Chef, the Chef server is the source of truth, whether that's an on-premise or in the cloud. And Chef the company has a tool called Chef Automate that is used for configuration synchronization and making sure that if one client has a version of a cookbook that is older, Chef Automate will basically replace that with the newer version if it knows it exists, so that if you make a change to a recipe but it hasn't been synced to all the clients, that when the client that out of sync goes to run that recipe or run that cookbook, that the Chef server will basically say, no, this is out of date, go sync with the server before you do anything. So and older versions of Chef did not have that. So I think that's something that they introduced around Chef 16 or 17, something like that. But Chef Automate was something that we didn't use when I was working, so we had to be very careful about not overwriting configurations, because that ended up happening quite a bit. So we definitely learned that lesson the hard way, unfortunately. So in terms of code quality and how does Chef manage how does Chef do linting, and how does Chef do things like that, they have a tool called Chef Inspec, which you can write your own analyzers. It's similar to tools like ReSharper and other kind of standard code analysis tools. This also integrates with Chef Automate, so that you can have a full end-to-end code linting and code analysis solution. And Chef has something called profiles, which are used to define what recipes should apply to what recipes and what cookbooks should apply to a given client, and every grouping of servers is called a node, I believe. So like I said, profiles are used to define basically what should run where, and yeah, so wanted to talk about best practices around data management, since, you know, if you leak a secret or you accidentally commit something to GitHub that you shouldn't, you'll probably find yourself in the news, you know, in short order. So secrets in Chef are traditionally stored in an encrypted vault known as a data bag, and knife encrypt and knife decrypt is the standard sort of CLI tool to manage encrypted secrets. Databases are initially created on the Chef server and synchronized. Nowadays, I would say that you should probably you should know that databags exist, but if you are managing secrets, you should probably integrate with HashiCorp Vault and use that. But databags are important to know because they are an older mechanism that is still used quite frequently. So I thought I would mention that. And policy files are Chef's way of creating basically immutable cookbooks, and they're useful for if you have an initial server that you're trying to bootstrap, you would run that cookbook against that initial server, and obviously, you know, it will download and basically do whatever you want. But policy files are a pretty powerful tool that Chef uses to kind of specify a lot of different things around immutability and bootstrapping and things like that. So thought that was also worth mentioning. Tooling, obviously, plugins are available for various IDEs. JetBrains, RubyMine, VS Code, pretty standard. It's actually been really cool to see the kind of the Chef ecosystem evolve from like 2017, 2018 to now. Because, you know, I know a lot of people who work in developer tooling, and developer tooling is a hard thing. And not all, you know, as people, and, you know, obviously folks who work for HashiCorp can attest to this. It's tooling is hard, but good tooling is very necessary. Yeah, so wanted to talk about some upgrading issues between different versions of Chef. As I mentioned earlier, Chef server without automate will overwrite any changes that have not been synchronized. So that is an issue that I and my coworkers have run into quite a bit. We'd also run into a lot of bugs in pre 3.0 versions of Ruby that because we were using older versions of Chef, that was something that, you know, we had a lot of pain around, and organizations that are using Chef should upgrade, should upgrade basically ASAP.
Hey, John.
Yeah.
What does that look, if you go back to the previous slide, what does that look like? does that mean you have server A and B and you make a change on server A to some config, and then you run like a chef update and the stuff on server A is overwritten because you haven't pushed up to the chef server?
Right, exactly. Yeah.
So shouldn't you always be using GitOps and like committing, pushing stuff to the chef server and having it push stuff out? Or are you typically in a workflow doing stuff on server A to test it out, and then you forget to push it up to the chef server? Is that kind of the use case?
Yeah, the latter is kind of the use case, where you forget to sync your changes, and then you're like, oh crap.
Boom.
But Chef Automate does a better job of basically saying, hey, this is out of sync, basically, hey, this is out of sync. I'm gonna force to synchronize before I apply these changes. So it's basically trying to guard against forgetfulness, even if you are using GitOps, because people are human.
Sure. Thanks.
Sure, yeah. And yeah, if anybody has any questions or comments or anything, feel free to just say something, and I'll be happy to talk about it. Yeah. So roles in Chef have been more or less deprecated in favor of policy files, but you will see older cookbooks and older recipes use roles manually, and this should be, obviously these should be migrated, but role management basically works how you would expect a role to work in any other systems. Any permissions you assign should be assigned carefully, and of course, principle of least privilege should of course apply. If you're working with older cookbooks and older recipes, and you're working with roles and role permissions, obviously be careful. And testing. Chef has Test Kitchen, which is basically a testing suite that is used to basically it's like a unit testing framework for Chef for testing new cookbooks and recipes. And Food Critic is kind of the standard Lint tool. There are probably others, but Test Kitchen is pretty comprehensive. We use Test Kitchen and Docker to test our stuff and sort of test things on kind of fake virtual servers that ran inside of Test Kitchen, so that we made sure we didn't blow anything up. And lately, over the last 3 or 4 years, a lot of the Chef community has gotten really good at using Docker images for things, and doing a lot of containerized development that way, which is great. Yeah, so basically, how does configuration work? How does default configuration work in Chef? Basically, when you initialize a Chef kind of a Chef recipe, there'll be a file called default.rb, which is kind of the top level configuration file that is used by Chef to manage nodes, manage clients, do client discovery. Chef is actually really good about doing automated discovery of clients and other Chef servers. So it'll go in, if you want it to, it can go and scan your network and look for other chef servers and things like that. So that's nice. And you can obviously do text-based templates that are often instantiated from default RB. And run lists are used for basically what recipes should be run against what clients and in what order. So run lists are the way that Chef manages that.
So is a client the same as a node, John?
So nodes are groups of servers, but clients are nodes are groups of servers, but clients are the ones that are individual things, like, a server you might have in AWS or an on-premise server somewhere. Clients are basically the things that talk to Chef servers, but nodes are groupings of Chef servers. So
So
you may have. Oh, sorry.
I was just gonna say, so if I have like three web servers, one running in EC2, one running in GCP, one running in on-prem because I'm an idiot and I believe in a hybrid cloud. And I want the same configuration for all of them. Those three things collectively are called a node, like the web server node. And then there's a client in each of those VMs or servers or whatever they are. Is that the way to think about it?
Yeah, and yeah. So you may have different if you're doing multi-cloud, you may have different Chef servers that are on your individual VLANs inside of your individual clouds, and they all talk to each other through that way, and that's also a node.
All the Chef servers are a node, is what you just said.
Right.
Oh,
Right.
Okay.
So, but run lists, but clients are the individual resources that are owned, that are basically for you in use by the clients, or in use by the organization. So your AWS server and your GCP server and whatever you have running, those are all clients that talk to the Chef servers. But nodes are groupings of Chef servers.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, sorry if I'm stumbling a little bit on terminology. It's been a little while, so I'm having to search my memory banks from from a few months ago. So
Good. All
if I
good.
stumble over something, apologize. And yeah, that's basically all I had as far as kind of a brief overview. Probably a little shorter than I had anticipated, but that was all I had for kind of I know I started a little bit later, but
That's great.
No worries.
Yeah, no
but yeah,
problem.
anybody have any questions or comments, anything?
So I have one, like, why would you use Chef as opposed to immutable infrastructure?
Immutable infrastructure.
Like baking AMIs or baking.
Oh, yeah. So I would say the biggest difference is for I would say, to me, it would be easier to manage changes versus if you're having to constantly regenerate immutable images. That may or may not be a bigger maintenance burden. I think it just depends on the size of your ops team and how much of a how much of a maintenance burden maintaining immutable images would be. So I think it really depends on your use case and depends on the size of your ops team. If you have a smaller ops team, if you only have maybe one person, then maybe it would be easier to use something like immutable images where you only make changes every so often. But if you have a larger team and you have a larger organization, I think Chef would be a better use case there, because Chef can be more flexible in terms of configuration client management. So, but to me, I'd say, like I said, it depends on what you're trying to do and the size of your ops team and how much change you anticipate. How much change you anticipate needing or not over the lifetime of whatever service you're trying to run.
Thank you.
Of course.
How do you know, like, say you have 3 instances across different like stacks, how do you know they're the same as now using something like Docker? Because they could have different dependencies or.
You gotta make sure you talk.
Can you hear him?
Did you hear that?
Yeah, I was gonna say, sorry, you're kind of far away. I couldn't quite hear you.
Yeah, if you have 3 different apps on 3 different stacks and they're all the same app, how do you know you're running the same environment between 3 stacks without Docker?
Yeah. So if you're not using Docker,
Or like pre-built AMIs or something that's consistent, like that you can guarantee is consistent. Because if you just say, I'm spinning up a Linux instance and running Ruby in it, and I'm spinning up a Windows machine running Ruby in it, things are going to be a little bit different.
right. Yeah. So, Chef knows all about individual operating systems. So, if you're not running Docker, but you do want to have cross-platform configuration management, Chef has clients for basically every major operating system, so it knows about individual operating systems and individual stacks, and it can manage all that for you.
I don't know if this helps, but I work for a managed WordPress hosting company. And at the end of the day, we did a really like backwards version. This is kind of a long way. This is way before Docker and Kubernetes and all that world. But like a buy website, and at the end,
Right.
it was to create a VPS. That VPS would have like a shell script. That shell script would grab a Git repo. That Git repo is effectively the Chef configuration for that server. And it would run the default or whatever the fuck it was. I can't remember. Run the script and get everything.
I mean, you're pointing out exactly. I remember I debugged a bug with this at Galvanize when we had 3 servers and one of them was on an older version of Linux and
That's exactly
a different version of Ruby.
Or like
And that was the truest, darkest corner of hell I've ever been in.
It's so hard. And you won't find it until like one customer somewhere is like, hey, we switched because we had to, and then it's falling apart. And it's like file types or something changed between Linux versions, and it just bites you so hard.
Yeah.
Cost benefit. I guess what you're kind of ultimately asking is like, why should you use like a Chef model in 2022?
Yeah,
that'd be my question too.
Docker, where you know it's the same.
Yeah.
Like,
is it cheaper? Is that why companies are still using Chef, the Chef model? Like because you put it on bare metal and you're like, you aren't using these like paths or
yeah. I mean, I think the biggest use case for Chef is if you are running bare metal and you're not doing you're not as heavy into containerization, because then you would probably just run everything on EC2 or EKS or whatever. But the company I was working for, they were trying to basically compete with AWS and GCP, but for a smaller niche. So they were very heavily on premise. So if you are on premise and you are, and you're not doing like bare metal hypervisors where you can run, something like ESXi or Hyper-V where you can run images on bare metal. If you're not doing containerization, that probably is your best chef use case.
And there, I imagine you weren't like using version, Ubuntu 12 and Ubuntu 15.
Yeah, right.
You were standardizing at the OS level too, I imagine.
Yep. Exactly. Yeah.
Lockdown.
Yeah, that probably takes care of some of the issue, right? When you're like, hey, everything's gonna be Ubuntu 18 or everything's gonna be Ubuntu
Right.
roll across everything.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
avoids a little bit of
Yeah.
effort.
And right, exactly. And we had actually run into that ourselves because we had some machines that were 18, I think it's 1804, and then we had other machines that were 1610, and then we had other machines that were something else. So yeah, we ran into that ourselves quite a bit.
Any other questions for John? All right, I think we're good. Thank you so much, John.
Yep. Thank you all so much. Appreciate it.
All right, well, I think that's pretty much it, right?
I think so.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right, so we'll see you all next month. I think I've got us, I don't remember. I have to look at the spreadsheet, but if you're interested in talking, and then we're probably gonna take December off. Maybe we'll do a social thing. I don't know. That's kind of TBD. But yeah, thanks again for coming.
Yeah.
And talking.
Thanks again, John. Yep.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Have a good one.
Too.
Bye. Thanks, John. See you on Twitter.